So in terms of fighting against these things, I think it's really important to have Christian unity. I mean, amongst Christians, there is a lot of infighting in between the Catholics and the Orthodox. We do have our real theological disagreements, and there are real ecclesiastical and governmental disagreements that we have amongst each other. But what do you think the importance is of having some degree of workable unity between us Christians, and how do you see that happening in the future, and why do you think it's important?
As you discussed today, our world, our society is on a path to destruction. There's no other way of putting it. They're on the path of destruction to the family, destruction to the church and community. But even with all of that, we have faith. We have faith that God will always be with us, God will always lead us, and God will help us endure, as we were talking about the Chaldean Church and all the persecutions that were physical persecutions. But today we are enduring a persecution to the soul. And it is very important, as you mentioned, we were talking earlier, how many times when Christians are a minority and are persecuted, they don't have time for theological debate. They put all that to the side, and they come together and to form a united front and to protect their children, the children of the church, and to try to continue on and survive the persecution. And there's one of the Chaldean prayers that talks about the 300 years of physical persecution in the beginning of the church. And the prayer is commenting, saying that when the devil saw that he was unable to ruin the church by persecution from the outside, he then began to try from the inside through the different heresies and different theological debates that brought division in the Catholic Church. And so I think that right now there's no more important time for unity, as you said, that with everything that's going on, it's very important that many minor differences be put to the side. And we see that with Pope Francis now. We see that with the strive for unity with the Orthodox Church and trying to have a common day for Easter.
Right. Yeah, that's something I was going to bring up.
And many other different things that we see from both sides, that they're trying to come together so that we can form a united front. Because right now, minor issues shouldn't be our focus.
Right.
Our focus should be lost souls that are lost, and people that are leaving the church, whether it's the Catholic Church, Orthodox Church, leaving the faith. And today, it's so hard for the church, for a priest, to be able to try to normalize the faith in the hearts of people who have been astray for so long. And right now, today, it's almost, as a priest, from my experience, and maybe some might disagree, for me, I get a sense of relief just when I see someone following any faith. Because today, there's so many people who have almost a hatred towards faith in general, and any God or religion. So for me, when I see a good practicing Jew, I'm happy. When I see a good practicing Muslim who is practicing Islam with love and hope and love for neighbor and others and tolerance, I am happy that he's a step closer to God than the common atheist of today. And of course, it's our job as pastors to be able to give our lives as a testament so that we can bring all people towards the fullness of truth, the church. But in today's society, we have to work for what we can get. And we have to try to have a very united front. We have to try to be united, not just in theology, but also in practical matters, to be able to bring people towards Christ. That should be the goal. Shouldn't be about politics, shouldn't be about even liturgy, even theology. It should be about Him. It should be about Christ and bringing people towards Christ to come to fall in love with Him as a person and accept Him in their lives. And then we can worry about other things.
Speaking of unity, when did the Chaldean Church come into communion with Rome, and how was its history? As you mentioned before, there was about 1,000 years after the Council of Chalcedon where there was not full communion between the two churches. So what happened in the 1500s?
So in 1553, we were in full communion with Rome after that whole entire period of separation, of isolation. I don't want to say schism, but it was just isolation, because it was, to me and to many theologians who argue, that it was just a uses of different words and the different languages and the different theologies and spiritualities of both churches that were not understanding the controversy. But if we now looking back, we see that there really wasn't a controversy at all. But the Catholic Church welcomed at the time Bishop Yohanan Solaka, who was a bishop who wanted to gather the people to have full communion with Rome, especially after there was a family who decided that only their family could be patriarch, it would be hereditary. And so this enraged him, and many, many other things. And so he went to Rome and he stayed there. And then after coming back from Rome, after being made the new patriarch, he was tortured and killed by the empire who was backing the other patriarch. And so there was a back and forth between the two churches until today. And even though there was a lot of hostility for many years, even bloodshed between the two, there were, in recent years, have been much respect and admiration towards each other in regards to the majority of the people. And we still do, many of us, see ourselves as one people, as one church, even though unfortunately we have this divide. So recently, in recent years, we saw with the efforts of the late Bishop Serhat Jem, who actually just passed away a couple months ago, he really tried as much as possible to bring both communities, bring both churches together. And he really wanted, in many ways, for us to acknowledge what we have in common rather than to continue a divide.
Right.
And I think that the divide doesn't really exist between the common people, the common day.
Yeah, I was going to say.
It's mostly the politicians and even some of the church officials. But mostly, I would say, the politicians are the ones that are planting this divide or even hostility in the hearts of common people. But the majority of them don't fall into this trap, and we have a great respect and admiration towards each other, and we don't really see the difference with each other, especially someone my age, especially someone born in the West, which is pretty soon going to be the majority of Chaldeans and Assyrians. And we don't see that. We see ourselves as one people. And as I was mentioning, Bishop Serhat Jemu, the late Bishop Serhat Jemu, worked tirelessly for this in the 90s. And
he was an Assyrian bishop, right?
He was a Chaldean bishop.
He was a Chaldean bishop.
He was, at the time, he was a priest in Detroit, Michigan. And he was leading the, let's say, peace talks between the two churches. And it was, on the other side, was Bishop Bawe Soro, who I think that's
probably who I was thinking.
Yes, who was a at the time an Assyrian bishop, who now is a Chaldean bishop.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he was leading their side of the discussions and of the drafting of what the future can entail. And the fruition of their work, even though they didn't accomplish what they wanted, which was full unity of both churches, the fruition of their work, they worked very hard to try to bring together the two churches. And even though they didn't accomplish their main goal, which was the unity of both churches, they were able to gather together in Rome in 1994 and to have Saint Pope John Paul II and the late Assyrian Patriarch Mardin Kharwi'aya to come together and sign the Declaration of Common Faith. And that was a very big accomplishment. It was something that many thought would never ever happen.
Right.
Especially with all the hostility of all those years, and the hostility that many Assyrians had towards Rome and the Pope. And so for the Assyrian patriarch to be even in the same room as the Pope and to be signing documents declaring that we believe in one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church, was something very great. And until today, it's something that everyone is very proud of, especially Mar Bawe Soro, the Bishop Bawe Soro, who was able to not only see the beauty in the Catholic Church when he was studying in Washington at the Catholic University, but even afterwards when he studied in Rome, and even later when he, as a bishop and his whole entire flock, joined the Chaldean Catholic Church, and he became a bishop of the Chaldean Church, and he actually became a bishop of Canada, of the eparchy here, and he served here until his illness. And he really was spearheading this whole movement of unity, and he did a lot, and I think many times what he did is overlooked. And I think for many viewers who want to know more about the differences and even about the Church of the East and how it is Catholic and Apostolic, his book, The History of the Church of the East, Apostolic and Orthodox. It's a very beautiful book that just outlines everything that happened in a very factual, historical, and theological way. And it shows that it was just a common misunderstanding of words and definitions. And today, I think, as people your age and my age, especially as Chaldeans and Assyrians in our age group, not many people see ourselves as different.
Right.
We see that our parents' generation, or even more our grandparents' generation, thought of ourselves as different, or even within the Chaldean Church. Our parents' generations, they even had division between villages. And now we see that that's slowly dwindling, that there's no such a thing, that we see ourselves all as one group, one church, one people, and that I believe that hopefully even in my lifetime that there will be no separation, that one day we will be one church, because the faithful that are my age, and how we were talking about how with all the struggles and all the temptations that today's society brings, I think we understand that unity gives us power.
It really does, Father. You know, and I brought up this point before the interview. It was to do with how in Iraq and in the Middle East in general, I have some friends who live out there who are both Catholic and Orthodox, and some friends who are here who are also Middle Eastern, and they always tell me how persecution is what unites Christians. And that's why you see such a unity amongst even Orthodox and Catholics. Over there is not such a separation between the Catholics and Orthodox. Like there's even sometimes communicatio and sacris and like sharing of sacraments, or at least doing processions together for Easter. And this has been something that's not a new thing. Can you explain why persecution maybe is such an important thing in the life of a Christian, and why we shouldn't run from it?
The persecution of Christians in the Middle East shows how strong we are when we are united. And it was beautiful how even now there's so many different times, holidays, and even in times of suffering, that all the churches come together, and we don't see or realize or feel that difference that before was once a problem. And one thing that I want to add is especially my parents' generation. So my grandparents' generation, most Chaldeans, Assyrians, our grandparents' generation, and before that, they all lived in villages in the north. Right. And those villages were secluded. It was just predominantly Christian, and they lived a very Christian and beautiful life of fellowship with all their cousins and extended family and people of their village, going back hundreds and hundreds of years. all having a very beautiful bond and unity to that specific land, to that village.
Right.
But then, in search of more economic pursuits, my parents' generation and a little bit of my grandparents' generation began to move to the cities, and began to move to Baghdad, to Mosul, to Basra, to different places, to be able to provide more for their family as they outgrew village life. And when there, it was their first experiences of living outside of a village that was all Christian. Many of them lived through many horrific experiences. But then as years pass, you see this common experience from my parents' generation that when they grew up in Baghdad especially, that they didn't see or feel or realize a difference between not just Christians, not just between Chaldeans, Assyrians, Orthodox, but even between their Muslim neighbors. Many Chaldeans in my parents' generation say, we didn't even know our neighbors were Muslim until we became teenagers and knew more about life, that there was such beautiful fellowship between neighbors that they wouldn't even discuss religion. They wouldn't even discuss the differences between them, even though they were completely different. And that was very beautiful. And the culture, Iraqi culture at that time, was not focused at religion. The Iraqi culture was focused on a very beautiful sense of pride of being Iraqi, of being a citizen of this country, a country full of history, beautiful history. And so going back to the Christians, not just that beautiful peace that was lived among many Christians and Muslims, but the Christians especially, there were many times where there were Christians in cities that didn't have a church that was of their own right, their father's right. And because of that, they baptized, First Communion, wedding at a church of a different right. And we see that many instances that now when they come here to be married and we do their files and all that. And,
yeah.
okay, so, I am Assyrian Orthodox, but I was baptized in this church.
Wow.
I am Chaldean, I am Assyrian, but I was baptized. I was given First Communion in this church. And it's confusing for us as priests,
Right, it's very confusing.
trying to get it all, but it shows, it's a testament that before there wasn't this common strictness, there wasn't this common sense of division, of difference between the churches.
And really up until the 18th century, I think it's about the 17th or 18th, where even up until that point, even after the 1054 schism that kind of everybody likes to point to with the Eastern Orthodox and maybe the 451 with the Orientals. I'm not sure how it was with the Orientals, but I know with Eastern Orthodox, even after that 1054 date, there was kind of this, it wasn't like a formal schism where there's absolutely a hard line, absolutely no communion. You would definitely have, in Russia, a little bit of communion between Catholics and Orthodox, or in the Middle East, there would be provisions kind of allowed by both churches to serve the communities better. So it's really interesting to see how that's kind of changed in the 17th, 18th centuries, and then over into the late 20th century. In the 1960s, 70s, we start kind of seeing a resurgence of dialogue. So I think that's a very positive thing.
And as you mentioned, persecution, it really plays a big role in uniting all the churches together, and even in times of sadness, even in times of struggle, whether it was the kidnappings and the bombing of churches in Baghdad after the U.S. invasion, whether it was ISIS, or whether it was even recently when a banquet hall of a wedding of hundreds of people was burnt on fire, and a fire struck. We don't know how exactly, and many people died. We see that in times of struggle, in times of persecution, that there was no talk of jurisdiction, of right, of any of these things. Whether it was in Baghdad when churches were being bombed after the U.S. invasion, kidnappings of bishops and priests and faithful, that all the churches came together. Later on, ISIS, all the churches came together, were working together. And even now, or recently in Habbaniya, there was a fire that happened at a banquet hall, a wedding party, and about 100 or so people died. And we see at the funeral that they all came together, all the patriarchs, all the bishops, they all came together to give comfort to the people. And they put aside any theological, political, liturgical differences and serve the people.
Yeah.
And so in times of struggle, we see this unity. But for us, we need to understand, as we were talking about earlier, that this is a time of struggle.
Yeah.
Even though we are in Canada, and even though we're in the United States and we're living,
We have a common enemy, together.
there is a spiritual persecution, and this is the time to come together.
And so a little bit of background on this channel, Lungs of Faith, for those who don't know, is that this channel is dedicated to exploring all things Catholic and Orthodox, from history to theology, spirituality, and even some debates. And whether you're Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, Muslim, or atheist, you are more than welcome here in this community. And this is a community that prioritizes respect, charity, and love towards one another. So if you've enjoyed this content, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with a friend who might enjoy this type of content. And until next time, God bless.